Media friends, welcome to the Khazanah Annual Review 2023, or in short, CAR 2023 Media Briefing. It is my pleasure to introduce to you our panels for today, and they are Dato' Amirul Faizal Wan Zahir, Managing Director, Khazanah Nasional Berhad, Puan Faridah Bakar Ali, Chief Financial Officer, Khazanah, Mr. Brian Lim, Executive Director, Head of Dana Impak and Healthcare. Without further ado, may I invite Dato' Faizal Zahir for the briefing. Dipersilakan, Dato'.
Me? Boleh nggak ya? Oke. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh and salam sejahtera. Thank you very much for the members of the media to join us here this morning as we present our Khazanah Annual Review and also sorotan 2022. Now, first of all, I think what I'm going to do is I'm just going to remind everyone a couple of things. Just oops, it's not working. Oh, I have to switch it on. Okay. Where do I point it? Okay. All right. So I have a couple of slides just to remind everyone here what we have set ourselves out to do and also how our funds are organized. Now, Khazanah is uniquely positioned in the middle of three major stakeholders. The first being the government of Malaysia, by virtue of us being 100% held by them. We also have the private sector as another key stakeholder through our investments. And just to share with you, I think our indirect exposure to the Malaysian market is about, stock market is about 3.7%. But if you add up the market cap of all our companies, it makes up about 14% of Bursa Malaysia. So it plays a significant role. The other thing, of course, is the rakyat, our rakyat. I think our investee companies in aggregate employ more than 100,000 staff. And when you look at the products and services of our companies, it touches every single Malaysian. So that's why, we have an important role. We see ourselves as an important role to help develop the nation. And that's why when you see in front of you, we came up with the theme Advancing Malaysia last year. Because of the uniqueness of our position where we can make an impact, that we are about developing the nation, and we've set up a theme about advancing Malaysia. Now you'll see here, there are four main pillars of that, which is the first one is to be an active corporate player. And when we think about it, through our companies, we want them to be globally competitive to ensure that they adopt innovation and technology. And that's important because that means that it creates more economic growth, more wealth for the nation, but also skilled jobs for Malaysians as well. The second part of it is Dana Impak, which we introduced last year. And I'll remind everyone, it's basically a fund to catalyze growth as well as to catalyze areas that help improve the country's resilience as well. And we have time to talk about that over the course of this presentation. Third item there is we do invest internationally. And when we invest internationally, we are very much in touch with what's happening out there in terms of the global megatrends, in terms of leading edge technology, and want to bring some of that knowledge as well as relationships back to Malaysia. And we've done that in a couple of occasions. And of course, the last item, where this is the stakeholder, which is basically the rakyat, we are focused on building capacity. It's about capacity building and also vibrant communities, because in anything, there's a softer value of being proud to be Malaysians. And we see that as a important goal for us to achieve also. And we have institutions, which you'll see afterwards, that play that role. And the foundation of that, of course, is we ourselves need to be financially strong. So we have to build that financial strength to remain sustainable in delivering this. And we have something on the screen, sorry, okay. And also embed sustainability in everything that we do. And the important thing here is about the right transition, how we gradually transition to a more sustainable operating environment. And of course, having the right team to actually execute that. Now, the next slide is how we are formed and how we're structured as far as funds are concerned. We have on the left our investment portfolio, and that's where a lot of our holdings are. And this is when I talk about making sure that our companies are globally competitive. That's the area that we intend to make an impact. Our Dana Impact portfolio, we have a 6 billion ringgit fund looking at socioeconomic outcomes. So we have a new measurement tool to measure socioeconomic outcomes. And it's looking at digital and technology, education and health, climate resilience, decent work and mobility, food and energy security, as well as the global competitiveness of our companies. The development assets, this is where we have investments where the gestation period is a lot longer. And an example of this would be Iskandar, our investment in Johor. We also have, we put here under special situations. And this is because these are companies which require more support from us in order to make them resilient going forward. Malaysia Airlines is one of them. They've been heavily impacted by COVID, but we can see a lot of improvements going forward here. And on the right, I mentioned to you about the building capacity and vibrant communities. And this is through our Yayasan Khazanah, our foundation. And with the foundation, we also have other entities as well, such as Khazanah Research Institute, which has produced reports to help help lawmakers set up policies. We've got Think City, which is looking at new ideas in terms of the whole environment of urban cities, or even some of the to rejuvenate some of the urban areas, and some others as well, which we can talk about later. So that is a reminder for everyone what we set ourselves out to do, as well as how we're organized. Now, 2022 in review. So the backdrop, I think this you know very well. You know this very well. It wasn't an easy year in 2022. We only came out of the pandemic sometime in April last year. And of course, the second half of last year, we saw things opening up. But we also saw a conflict in Europe. This is Ukraine and Russia. We also saw saber rattling with US and China with regard to Taiwan. So all of this was happening. And of course, that creates a lot of instability in an environment where we saw monetary policy tightening, rates increasing, and therefore you saw huge swings in the market. And at the same time, while the world is easing their COVID restrictions, we also saw China, the largest, most populated country in the world, still remaining in lockdown during that period. So that was a tough environment. Now, Malaysia was quite moderate in a way. It saw GDP growth as it came out of the pandemic. But of course, markets was also impacted by what we saw. So we did see some recovery in the markets. And the year ended with the general election, which saw Dr. Sri Anwar Ibrahim as the 10th Prime Minister and the unity government in place. Now, we are impacted by the left-hand side of the screen in front of you, which is basically the global market performance. And you'll see emerging markets, Asia went down by 23% year on year. S&P 500, this is more the US market, went down by 19%. And the Malaysian market went down by close to 5%. Now, on the right-hand side tends to be more of the economy, and this is really coming out of a fairly low base. So Malaysia recorded about 8.7% for 2022, but our investments are more impacted by the left-hand side, which is the market. Now, here's a snapshot of the performance for the year. I'll go through it in more detail later on. So, our investment portfolio delivered a 4-year rolling net asset value, time-weighted average rate of return of 2.2%. We also managed to execute some value creation plans. We did the largest IPO in 2022 in the country. There was also the largest merger in the country as well with CelcomDigi. And of course, we started building our blocks in terms of creating value with regard to Enviro. Last year for Dana Impak was a year where we really had to look at the whole ecosystem, making sure that our implementation is right. So we've identified about 500 million projects that we could actually support, which I'll talk about a bit later. And of course, we continue to impact the society with our initiatives on through our foundation. Our balance sheet wise has been strong. Our AV cover, our realizable asset value cover is at 2.7, which is we're comfortable. And we recorded a profit of 1.6 billion in 2022. So we launched our sustainability framework. Again, I'll talk a bit about that. And of course, as far as the team is concerned, I think we did quite well in improving the employee engagement within our own organization. Now, this slide here is just to show that despite the current environment or the environment last year where it was quite tough for divestment, it was important for us to continue our investment cadence because this basically looks at the potential value return 5 to 7 years later. So this is why it was important for us to continue our investment cadence. Now, the results that we have here, I mentioned to you about the 2.2% rolling average. The year itself, our portfolio went down by 5.7%, and it still remains at a level of 122 billion. Let me just explain to you down below. From a portfolio perspective, emerging markets went down by 22.8%, the US by 19.5%, and of course, Malaysia went down by 4.6%. And in all, if we compare ourselves with other sovereign wealth funds, I think we did fairly good, fairly okay. Here's a snapshot of the composition of the performance. So we look at 2022, we're impacted by public markets, Malaysia, as well as global. Malaysia mainly because our portfolio is largely exposed in Malaysia. And of course, the private markets has remained resilient as well. So that offset our policy of diversifying risk has actually helped us manage the volatility of last year. Now, here I mentioned to you about the profits. Now, profit is 1.6 billion compared to 670 million of the previous year. And this was mainly because of gains from investment portfolio divestments, as well as the lower impairment that we experienced in 2022. We paid a dividend of 500 million last year, and our balance sheet, as I mentioned to you before, remains resilient as we go along. Now, some of the highlights that we did in terms of value creation. So this is where we're doing our bit in terms of adding some excitement to the Malaysian exchange. We listed our company, which happens to be the largest IPO in 2022 for Bursa, and it's really supporting Farm Fresh. We have a 30% stake in that. On the right-hand side, you'll see CelcomDigi, which created the largest telco company, and I presume it's also one of the largest mergers in the year. And in our theme of building competitive companies, we strengthen Enviro through a partnership with a global player, SK Ecoplant. And the idea here is to actually have access to innovation and technology of a global level. Last year as well, we we mentioned, we gave clarity to our investee companies of our expectations of them. So we set out our shareholder expectations as well as our voting guidelines, which is available on our website. And here we set out 6 core expectations, looking at generation of long-term shareholder value. We emphasize to the board members that it's not just about governance, being a board member, but also assisting in the development of the corporate strategy. They are businesses after all. The chairperson is an important role that sets the tone for the board effectiveness of companies, and having the right management team, as well as protection of shareholder rights. We also mention about the importance of sustainability as a way to future-proof the investee companies, and set out the voting guidelines as well. Here we mention about Dana Impak. The areas there are the focus areas that we did. Now in 2022, number 1 and number 2 I'll elaborate in the following slide, but this is where we try to be a catalyst to crowd in investments in our initiatives, rather than do everything ourselves, because we're just a fund, and the private sector has a huge role to play. And this is where we support entrepreneurs, the venture capital ecosystem, and also the skilling as well, making sure there's the right talent in order to feed those industries. We also looked at nature-based solution, carbon market. That's a huge potential for us to participate in, and also a huge potential for the country. Agri is a sector that we are looking at very, very closely to really understand the challenges first. So a lot of it is understanding what's happening on the ground first before we actually deploy investments. And lastly, we have a measurement framework. Now, Dana Impak is, yes, it's about investing for returns, but the more important thing is the impact that would have. And we've come up with a framework which we will launch soon. But it's an impact assessment tool where it follows the theory of change. We look at what we hope to achieve and start measuring those outcomes as we embark on our projects. And these are measures that we've benchmarked globally, so it's not something that is unique, that can only be applied to this country, but it's a framework that can be applied across many jurisdictions as well. Now, the first 2, let me talk to you about the first 2 here. Okay. So, the impact fund that we have, it's about studying the ecosystem and appreciating that everyone has a role to play. Now, of course, when we actually look at the whole ecosystem, we identify that there are certain gaps in place. And with a certain gap, this is where we come in and plug those gaps through our investments. In some cases, it could be a gap due to a policy, in which case we use our relationship with the government to try to rectify that as well. Now, we recently announced our Future Malaysia program last week, right? Last week. And here, in the diagram there, you see the whole spectrum of the growth of companies. Early stage, starting from maybe academia research, venture builders, incubators and accelerators, pre-seed and seed. And then you have a late stage where it looks at Series A and Series B financing, and of course, looking at the PE and growth equity. Now, we found that the late stage VC is an area where it's very, very risky, and there's not enough funding for that. And this is where we participated, we've used 500 and Gobi partners. We've invested in them. And these are companies or VCs that are internationally renowned. They're global players. And we seeded them in order to look at investments in the country at that stage. Now, at the same time, in terms of playing our role, coming up with new ideas at the early stage VCs, we've partnered Petronas Future Tech 3.0. That's actually a very good initiative by them, so we partner them. And this is part of the thing of understanding who's doing what, and therefore we partner those players rather than overlap with them. We also have our Khazanah Impact Innovation Challenge, which we did early on in aged care, and that has helped because it has created attractive opportunities at the late stage VC or even at the early stage VC. We've also brought in plug and play. And plug and play is to facilitate corporate ventures. For companies to do their own corporate venture, it could be a huge capital investment on their part, and the risk level could be much higher. So this is a way where they can leverage on the network of potential startup companies or early stage companies around the world, not just in Malaysia, but around the world where they can have access and look at. And at the same time, our companies will also up their game in order to understand the standards available to be globally competitive as well. And of course, towards the later stage, this is where we come in through direct investments, not just us, but some of the GLICs as well will also be interested in this stage. I put there Carsim and FarmFresh because that's an example of two companies that has gone through this cycle. Carsim, we invested in Gobi MAVCAP, who invested during the early stage. And of course, when they grew to the PE or growth equity, we participated in their Series D financing as well. That's an example of where we support from early to the end. FarmFresh, same thing. Our exposure to them at the early stage was via a VC. And as they grew, we supported them directly until IPO. Now, as we were going through this whole understanding the ecosystems and speaking to the players, we found that talent was scarce. And this is where we embarked on another scheme, which is Future Malaysia Skills. And the talent pool, at least in the digital space, was really the creators, the people that can actually create and code and come up with new things. Now, what we sought to do here was to look at potential institutions that can actually help speed up or accelerate the talent pool in our country. So we looked at various options available, and we found one, which is 42. And this is actually quite interesting. And again, this was announced last week. And it's very interesting is because you can, the youngest who joined was at the age of 17 years old. And it is a network, a global network that actually adopts this. And the oldest, I believe, is 60 plus in Sweden. So it's very, very varied and allows a peer-to-peer group training. And it's basically accessible to everyone. It's free. You don't have to pay in order to go through it. And it gives you that either access at an early stage, an option for you to even have a career change, but it's creating that opportunity for our people to actually get into this area. And this is done together with Sunway Education Group, who are there, and we're co-investing with them. And the purpose of this, of course, is to open up new centers, north, south of Peninsula, Penang and Johor, bring it to East Malaysia and Sarawak. So again, it's to open it up and have more people to be able to access it, including the B40 group as well. And we'll be looking at this and measuring the impact. And it's to create the whole ecosystem. So that's an example of what we've done. Next is we looked at we also launched our sustainability framework. And this is looking at E. We mentioned our targets for emissions. We looked at social as well, looking at what we want, what our expectations on us, as well as our investee companies, as well as governance. That was launched last year in June. I mentioned to you about the voting guidelines. And lastly, we also looked at our own sustainability as well. Right. Next slide. Here's an example of what we've done for our last pillar, which is basically through our foundation. One thing I would like to mention here, Khazanah has looked at 164 projects working with civil society organizations. And what is interesting here is there aren't many institutions in Malaysia that do grant making at a wide scale such as this. And through the efforts of Khazanah, they actually created a model where they can see certain CSOs working better together in tackling certain issues. An example is PPRs, where there's a methodology of a community-based approach, looking at an anchor CSO that comes in, gains trust, and after that you have the other CSOs coming in. And that proves to be more effective as you group, not through one NGO, but through a coordinated fashion through multiple NGOs. And also we have other institutions there, Khazanah Research Institute, looking at pressing issues for the country. Taman Tugu, that has done really, really well, but we have 700,000 visitors to date, as well as Think City. Our own programs as well, we have KMF coming out with new ideas, thought-provoking ideas, and last year's KMF was attended very well. We launched a virtual gallery, and I think more recently we launched the second part of our virtual gallery. And here we look at the performance to date. In total, we've delivered about 17.1 billion in dividends and a cumulative shareholder value of 65.1 billion over the years. Now, moving forward remains challenging. I think when you look at the 2023 markets, it remains volatile, it remains challenging as interest rates inch up rapidly. So it is that kind of environment that we will be facing in 2023. But we do have some, hopefully, something that can offset some of those challenges. And China reopening is one. They've just reopened, but through our experience and through other countries' experience, you know that it takes a bit of time before people are more confident in order to go back to normal. In Malaysia, of course, it's slightly moderate. So we'll see a moderate growth. We'll see potential fiscal consolidation. But I think one of the things which we hope to see is to see more foreign inflows as well as FDIs into our country. And I'll end with this slide before I open up for Q&A. Just as a summary of the things that we'll be focusing on. Main thing is value creation efforts, and these are our Malaysian assets, are now listed companies. Dana Impak remains important for us. We're looking at a continued deployment investments, but also to look at how we can actually bring value back into this country. Our sustainability framework is underway, and we want to continue executing that. And finally, we're not forgetting about the people here, which is creating societal value, building capacity, and creating vibrant communities.